Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRN.
Celebrity designer Jeff Lewis is back with Hollywood House Lift.
I'm excited to be working with new clients.
I'm not getting rid of that.
I hope I never see you both again.
Yeah. An all-new season.
Those have to go. That has to go.
From oh, wow,
It's been an actual nightmare.
to oh, wow.
This is such an upgrade.
With celebrities like Josh Duhamel, Christina Ricci, and Gina Rodriguez. Dazzle me, Jeff.
It looks like Chuck E. Cheese.
Stream an all-new season of Hollywood House Lift with Jeff Lewis. Now streaming on Freevee.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout. Heartland Radio, raw and real. Tune in, speak up, and feel what we feel. He's breaking down the noise.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Grab your coffee, raise that flag, stand your ground, never wave that rag. News with a backbone, voice of the free. Rick's got the pulse of liberty. It's a Rick Robinson Show, bold unafraid. Truth bombs drop in a red state parade from the
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is Chat Lives Matter Day right here live on KLRnradio.com. And this is the TBS Superstation edition of the Rick Robinson Show because we started at like 5 after. Anyway, dude, one of our platforms was being gay. Not going to mention which one. YouTube. But yeah, not going to mention which one. But yeah, so it took me a minute to figure out why it wasn't firing off. But we got it squared away. We're here. We're live. And oh my God, is there lots and lots and lots of, dude, so much to talk about. So little time. It's funny. Every time I try to cut back a little bit and try to give myself some time to work on some other things, the news cycle goes so crazy that I'm like, dude, I could do a 6-hour show and not cover all of it. I mean, I'd have to have like 4 sponsors to actually be able to do a 6-hour show. Because that would eat up so much of my time. I would definitely have to be making a small fortune to be able to do it. But if anybody likes what I do and wants to become a benefactor, just saying. No, okay, mostly kidding. But dude, okay. So before we get into the serious stuff, because there's plenty of that, we got to talk about this stuff. So hang on, I'm getting my script pulled back. Or not really script, but guardrails kind of pulled back up because I had, for those of you that are newer on here, I have a tendency to start going off on tangents. You know, look, squirrel. So yeah, so I've started putting together kind of an outline, so I kind of stay on topic for the most part, unless there's anything breaking that happens. So as I said a second ago, we've been heavy this week in between doing my own shows and sitting on other people's shows. We've been talking about political violence, court fights, redistricting, judges, injunctions, ICE protests. I mean, we've basically been doing constitutional cardio for most of this week, and it's only Chat Lives Matter Day. So before we dive back into the legal wood chipper, because there is a lot of that today, I want to start with something that is actually kind of cool. And I missed this yesterday because I was dealing with helping friends out with stuff. So I've been playing catch up ever since I got home last night. So King Charles was at the White House. President Trump hosted the state dinner, and I still think Barron had a lot to do with this. I think Barron was kind of sitting over his shoulder, going, "Father, it's called rage bait. Just click it," because of course the White House put out a post that said 2 kings, and of course it started everybody freaking the hell out on the left anyway. Most of us on the right were just like, yeah, whatever. We went to war to get rid of the one, and you're not one, or you wouldn't have left the first time. But anyway, the thing about it, and the thing that I'm starting to understand is the left actually no longer has a sense of humor anymore. They try to use your sense of humor as a weapon, and then when you don't get the joke, they browbeat you over about it. You know, just look at what's been happening with Kimmel. And I will say this, look, I get why, especially Melania. After what happened on Saturday night, I can understand why Melania was kind of mad about that joke. But at the same time, I'm going to remind you guys of an old news axiom. There's no such thing as bad press because it gets your attention. And this is something that I've been talking about with all the folks that are screaming and yelling, especially, you know, when it comes to what appears to be the imminent death of Kurtzman Trek, is everybody's like, well, CBS and Paramount didn't promote the show, and they didn't do this, and they didn't do that. It's no wonder nobody was watching. Like, dude, with all the negative stuff that people were saying about it, that would have caused a lot of people just to tune in to see if it was as bad as they said it was. So most of the people that were watching were probably watching it just to see if it was terrible. I happen to be one of those people. That, and I love Star Trek, so I try to support it no matter what. The last few years have been really hard. I had a lot of issues with Discovery. I have some issues with Strange New Worlds, not nearly as many as everybody else does. But the thing about it is, what's driving a lot of the core fan base crazy is kind of the same thing that's happening in politics today. They are telling you how you're supposed to feel, what you're supposed to think, and then they get mad at you when you don't respond to their messaging. It's like, look at Strange New World. They could have just as easily given the look of the old aesthetic with a little bit more of an update, so you can see, hey, this is, you know, this is different because technology is different now, kind of like the difference between the smooth skin Klingons and the not. But they didn't. They just made everything look like, oh my God, this is really, really advanced for what is supposed to be based in the old series timeline, and it threw a lot of folks off. Well, the same thing happened with this because, King Charles was at the White House. President Trump hosted the state dinner. Queen Camilla was there. And no, I don't mean Gonzo's chicken. The whole diplomatic pageantry machine was running, and His Majesty brought what might be one of the best diplomatic gifts in recent memory. During World War II, there was a British submarine named HMS Trump. I'm going to say that again. There was a British submarine named HMS Trump. It launched in 1944, served in the Pacific, and King Charles presented President Trump with the original bell from the submarine. The bell literally says Trump 1944. That is objectively cool. I don't care where you land politically. Unless you're a leftist right now, you're just raging at me, and it doesn't matter anyway. That's not a fruit basket. That's not a ceremonial pin. That's not a bust, pardon me, of the current king. It's not one of those awkward plaques that gets put in the store, gets thrown into a storage closet next to an old printer and 3 boxes of. Oops, hang on. Wrong button. I don't know what's happening. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was trying to mute and sneezing, so I'm afraid that last sneeze came through, and I'm about to have to do it again. And yes, before anybody asks, I'm taking my allergy pills today. It's just that time of year around here. All right. So again, I don't care where you land because it's not a fruit basket, and it's not, a plaque that's going to get shoved into a storage closet next to an old printer and 3 boxes of extension cords. Wait, who told everybody what I had in my storage closet? That is a World War XI submarine bell. No, I'm sorry, World War II submarine bell with your name on it. And then King Charles lands the line, if you ever need to get hold of us, just give us a ring. That is elite dad level joke diplomacy. And I do have to ask, where were the No Kings people? Because apparently we had an actual king in Washington, D.C., and suddenly everybody who hates kings remembered they had errands to run. The No Kings crowd has spent months warning us about monarchy, and then an actual king shows up, and they're like, well, not that one. He brought a bell. Apparently, the official position is no kings unless the king has a charming accent, a nice suit, and shows up with antique naval hardware. So yes, no kings unless they're ceremonial. British and come bearing World War II. Damn it. Ilhan Omar is going to make me say that wrong all the time now. I swear. No, not really. World War II submarine bells. But now that we've had our fun, let's get back into the American version of royalty. Judges, bureaucrats, and politicians. And yes, I said what I said because they have become the American version of royalty, which is the last thing our founding fathers intended. But they're all fighting over who gets to tell the rest of us what the Constitution actually means today. Because the king was the fun part, the courts are the serious part. This week, it feels like half the country is being litigated in real time. Redistricting, voting rights, ICE enforcement, protest limits, lower courts getting checked by higher courts. So we start with a bell from HMS Trump, and then we move straight into the legal bell ringing happening across the country. You know that old song, Jesus Take the Wheel? Well, this week it's the courts taking that wheel. This is one of these weeks where you can almost see the whole country being litigated in real time. Elections, immigration enforcement, protest rights, congressional maps, federal authority, state courts, federal appeals courts, the Supreme Court. It's all landing in front of judges and all happening right in front of us. And depending on which courtroom you're standing in, the Constitution apparently means something very different. That's the part we have to talk about today. Not just one ruling, not just one case, not just one headline. The larger story is that the courts are now the battlefield for almost every major political fight in the country. I'm going to say that part again. The courts have become the major battleground for all of the political fights in the country right now. Again, not anything our founders ever intended, but here we are. When politicians cannot win cleanly at the ballot box, they sue. When activists cannot get what they want through legislation, they sue. Touch me and I'll sue. When states do something the other party hates, they sue. When law enforcement tries to secure a building, they sue. When a congressional map does not look useful enough, they sue. And then everyone pretends they are shocked that judges, those black-robed folks, I guess it's a good thing their robes were never white, huh? Have so much power. No, we built this. Both parties have used the courts. Both sides have run to judges when the political system did not give them what they wanted. But the modern left has elevated this into an art form. They spent years telling us that courts were sacred when they were blocking Trump. But now, when higher courts start checking lower courts, or when courts say democratic power plays have legal limits too, suddenly we're supposed to believe the whole system is illegitimate. That's not constitutional principle. That's, again, a team sport scorecard. So today, we're going to walk through it. Virginia redistricting, the Supreme Court, the Voting Rights Act, the lower courts trying to slow or reshape implementation, James Comey and the problem of threat law bumping into the First Amendment, Mamdani and New York City discovering the budgetary warmth of collectivism, the Ninth Circuit stepping into the Portland ICE protest case, and then later we're going to widen this out beyond America and talk about assisted suicide in between Canada's MAID program and what happens when law stops protecting vulnerable people and starts managing them. Now, the reason this becomes important is this has kind of been the through theme for everything that I've been doing since Saturday night. As far as the left and most pop culture is concerned, humans are nothing but meat sacks, and they get treated accordingly. And that's part of the problem. All right, so we got some folks in the chat. Sorry, I've been scrambling to get things started and fed up and getting through the opening of the show. So I do want to take a moment just to say welcome to both Rooster and BZ, who are already hanging out in the chat. We have multiple chats open, all streaming to the same place. So wherever you happen to be listening from or watching from, unless you're listening to a replay, then you can come hang out in the chat if you want and make your voice heard as well. We don't close out any of our chats or anything like that. Yeah, we're going to get into that. Look, I admire the fact, and we talked about this a little bit in the tertiary last night during Men Explained Poorly. It's interesting that now that a certain DOJ Barbie is no longer in the building, suddenly things are at least trying to get done. But we're going to get into why I feel like this case isn't going to go very well for the folks that really want him to have the screws put to him later in the program. Because BZ's just put in the chat, he's probably going to win that one. And he's not wrong. We'll get into why, though, here in just a little bit. Now, as far as all of that goes, like I said, well, since I got a late start, I keep looking at the clock going, it's time for a break, but I forgot we didn't start on schedule. So I guess it doesn't really matter. Because, we still have time. We still have time. Right now, I'm just trying to, I lost my tab with my notes. Where did my tab with my notes go? Oh, there we go. All right. Because again, now that humans are basically being treated as meat sacks with one side of the country, and apparently it's starting to happen worldwide, all of these stories begin to touch on the same central question: what does the law teach a country to value? Now, the other more important question I feel there is, why have we started using the law to allow that to be what teaches a country value? Does it teach us that the Constitution has fixed meaning, or does it become a team jersey? Does it teach us that protesting has boundaries, or that vandalism becomes speech if the cause is fashionable? Now, the left wants you to think that second part, and the media has been enforcing that now and reinforcing that now for years. Under Barack Obama, if you go back and you look at everything through the actual lens of completely objective history, then you'll notice that, especially for his second term, you couldn't go more than a couple of months without a town being on fire somewhere. And then you would have all the media circling around all these places that were on fire with, their talking heads in the camera shot saying this is mostly peaceful, while they've got cars burning behind them and buildings burning behind them and people throwing rocks. But it's the whole Leslie Nielsen, nothing to see here. It was happening in real time, and it still does. But that's part of the problem, because according to the left, protest don't have any boundaries anymore. That's why they're so upset, and that's why they keep saying what happened to the two folks in Minnesota were murder. Never mind the fact that these people were being violent. Never mind the fact that they were angry. Never mind the fact that they were causing damage to public property and actually trying to run people over. Never mind any of that, because it's all just protest. Does the law teach us that budgets matter, or that somebody else can always be forced to pick up the tab? Well, you know how the left feels about that one. Does the law teach us that life has dignity or that despair can become paperwork? My question again is, why is it the law teaching us that part? Our laws come from our society. So we should be the ones determining whether life should and always does have dignity or not. But that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. The law is downstream from what a culture values, and this week the courts are forcing us to ask what America and the West still believes is worth protecting. In the Virginia redistricting democracy until the map fails is one of the first things we're going to be moving into. So let's start in Virginia, because this one is a perfect example of how political language gets laundered through legal process. Virginia voters approved a Democratic-backed redistricting referendum, but it's not just as simple as them approving it. The simple fact of the matter is Virginia's constitution wasn't followed. The language, if you look at the actual language, not just the snippet they put on the ballot, the snippet they put on the ballot was confusing enough. The actual language of the bill was even more so confusing. And that's one of the reasons why for right now, everybody's like, no. So the point of that referendum was to create a new congressional map. However, remember, they were going from, 6 to 5, I think. 6 Democrat, 5 Republican, which denotes Virginia's purple state status and kind of is well in line with their typical voting that they do, because that's usually most of the time how it goes, is a shade towards blue and a lot of red. But they were trying to take it to 10-1. Problem is, again, the Virginia Supreme Court has now left a lower court block in place, meaning certification and implementation remain paused while the legal fight continues. Now, the folks on the left had petitioned the court to go ahead and allow the implementation to begin while the ruling was being considered by the Virginia Supreme Court, and the Virginia Supreme Court, without saying much of anything, basically just said, yeah, no, we're not touching this till we make our final ruling, so everything stays the way it is. And it was put out in like a one-sentence ruling, which is rare even for Virginia. Now, put the partisan label aside for just a second and look at the mechanics of this. Every seat matters heading into the midterms. Everybody knows that. Republicans know it. Democrats know it. The map is not some academic exercise. It is a breakdown of power and control. It is who gets to write laws, who gets subpoena power, who controls committees, who shapes the next 2 years. So when people start talking about redistricting like it's just a clean little civics lesson, yeah, don't buy what they're selling. Redistricting is knife fighting with a legal pad. The court did not say the whole thing is dead forever. It said the lower court block stays in place for now. Now, I will say this, based on the fact that the decision to say that they're not touching it was basically one sentence, I don't think this is going to bode well for Democrats. You can bookmark that for me, and if I'm wrong, I'll eat crow later. But I don't think it's going to go well for them. Just throwing that out there. Politically, that matters because timing matters, deadlines matter, ballot calendars matter, election administration matters. You can win a legal argument too late for it to matter in the next election cycle. And this is where the language gets cute. When your side draws the map, it's democracy. When the other side draws the map, it's gerrymandering. When voters approve your preferred process, it's the will of the people. When a court says, yeah, hold up, did you actually follow the rules? Suddenly the court is standing in the way of democracy. No, the Constitution is not a suggestion box just because the maps look useful. And that's the part voters need to understand. A democratic outcome still has to follow constitutional procedure. You don't get to skip the rules because the end result polls well with your coalition. And I'm going to say something that Ross from Behind the Enemy Lines, who should be on later tonight at, 9 p.m. Eastern, I think, said the last time I was on their show with him. As a representative republic, he doesn't even really understand why we do these direct ballot things, because we're not a democracy. I'm just going to let that sit and let it breathe. Because anyway, that is especially true in this case when redistricting becomes both parties have their hands dirty, because they do, because both parties have been doing this now for a while. Republicans draw map to benefit Republicans, but then again, why wouldn't they? Democrats draw maps to benefit Democrats. Yeah, they do, but again, even in Texas, even though they just did a redraw, which was following Texas's constitution, they still left Democrats a lot of representation possibilities. Whereas in Virginia, they're like, no, we're just going to make sure you guys never win anything again. So that's kind of the big difference. Look, the Republicans could have done this. And the thing about it is, if they had done it in Texas, especially based on the Louisiana ruling that we're going to be getting into here in a little bit, it might have actually held up. Because the courts, at least the Supreme Court, is trying to drag us back into the 21st century. The Obama administration and every Democrat administration since has been trying to tell you that we still live in pre-1960s America, that white people are evil, that racism is everywhere, that you can't look behind a bush without seeing a dude with a pointy hat hiding underneath in a white robe. But we all know why that's been happening now too, don't we? Because they've been paying agitators to make sure that you saw it all. And this is part of why I think some of the language, and we'll get into this later, some of the language, the concurrence and the assenting opinions put out in Louisiana becomes important, because the court is specifically saying this isn't the America we live in anymore. They don't need special districts. And they're not wrong. This goes back to what the Artemis II astronaut said when someone said, how do you feel about being one of the first black men to, or actually, I think he may be the first black man to orbit the moon? Why are you worried about my skin color? I want to be remembered as an American who got to orbit the moon. And that, ladies and gentlemen, goes back to something that I have been trying to talk about now for almost 20 years. Martin Luther King did, in fact, have a dream where the skin color of his children wouldn't matter. We've gone from the skin color mattering to the point where, because they look different, they're evil, they're stupid, they're dumb, to their skin color matters so much that now we have to make sure that they get all the things. We've overcorrected. And that overcorrection has made everything worse. Because the thing about it is, and I'm going to say this again, I am a capitalist, but some of these things that people have figured out ways to make money at are insane to me. Look at what happened with the SPLC. They became what they were created to fight, so that they could continue to make money to fight monsters that don't truly exist anymore. And that's why some of this stuff is so important. So if saving democracy just happens to give your party a near total congressional advantage, because remember, that's the whole spin of the Democrats, we're doing what we're doing in Virginia because we have to save democracy from the evil old Republicans. So if that gives you a clear congressional advantage in a competitive state, maybe we should all slow down a bit and maybe reread the Constitution. That's what the courts are supposed to do. They're not supposed to rubber stamp the political outcome just because one side has better slogans. And this is where we start to see the theme of the day. The law is supposed to slow us down. It is supposed to force the process to matter. It is supposed to say, I know you want this particular outcome, but did you have the authority to engineer it? Did you follow the rules? Did you respect the limits? Because without that, democracy becomes just another word for whatever the loudest faction wants by Friday. All right, so I think we have hit the point where we're going to have to take a quick break. Gives me a chance to catch up with the chat while we're on break. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned. And this is, again, one of our latest from the K-Alarm Radio House Band. Again, I know I keep saying this, but every time I think I'm going to have 5 minutes to try to get caught up on our releases, something else goes sideways. So we've got a lot of stuff that you're hearing here that's available pretty much only here for right now. Things will be starting to be put out to your favorite streaming services here pretty soon again, though. Here we go. Stay tuned.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united
welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I am Rick Robinson. This is my show. We do this thing every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, noon Eastern. Don't forget, I'll be back tonight starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. First, pushing buttons for the Inquiry crew. Then we should have a conservative curmudgeon radio show, which I will also be pushing the buttons for. Then we have Behind Enemy Lines Radio, which we normally simulcast over here, and lately I have been a guest upon, so we will see what happens with that. 10 p.m. Eastern, Rick and Orty live. That's myself and the Amish one, talking to you more about politics, pop culture, all the stuff in between. And then we should finish out our night with Edge of Liberty over from our SHR Media crew. I do want to give a quick shout out. BZ unfortunately was not able to do a show last night. He was not feeling well, so he'll be back tomorrow. He's also hanging out in my chat today, which is good because that means I know he's feeling better. And then what is it? Tomorrow night, Jen and Rick will hopefully be back in between Bug making his musical theater debut in school and a bunch of other things that are going on with Jen's new job. It's been kind of hit and miss, but I think we might be back next week or tonight or tomorrow night. I don't even know what day it is anymore. Jeez. And then Friday night, back to normal over there as well with He Said, She Said, 8:30 p.m. Eastern with the lovely Aggie Rican. Saturday night will be Juxtaposition with myself and the Amish one. Did I mention I'm a workaholic? And that is at, 11 p.m. Eastern, so 9 Central. So yeah. And then Sunday night, back with Kingdom and Country. I know I normally do that all at the end, but since we started late, I wanted to kind of change things up a bit. So you guys are still going to get the full 2 hours. I just don't want to spend the last 5 minutes of the show doing all my stuff. We'll save the rest of it for later. Anyway, so we're back. We're live, and we're going to keep the show rolling here. And so this is where we kind of get into the meat of things. So this is the Louisiana and the Voting Rights Act. So you take that Virginia fight and connect it to the Supreme Court's ruling in the Louisiana redistricting case, and you can see leftists freaking out all over the place already. I'm starting to think SCOTUS is racist. I don't even know what they did this for. Now, this was a 100-page assenting opinion, so I have just really started scratching the surface of it. And as much as I have come to rely on my little artificial intelligence assistant known as ACE, I'm not going to trust it to scan 100 pages, so we may actually come back to this on a later show. But I did want to at least talk about the broad strokes of this today. The Supreme Court issued a 6-3 ruling in the Louisiana case, striking down Louisiana's second majority black congressional district as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Now, this becomes important in a lot of ways, and it's why the left is starting to freak out, because what they're basically now saying is you can't just draw districts on the base of race. Now, what that means is the same thing that Martin Luther King was talking about way back in the 60s. People's skin color shouldn't matter as much as, everything else. And so the Supreme Court, again, is trying to drag us into the 21st century and have us leave all this race baiting BS behind. And of course, the left themselves is wanting to have nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, to do with that. We've got a few clips we're going to be playing on this one, so hang on while I start getting them queued up. Because there's a few. I actually didn't play some of the cuter ones with the King and POTUS because I wanted to save more time for these. Because as fun as that story was, it doesn't really matter that much. Again, I did find it interesting that, the one time that y'all could have actually been, protesting a king, y'all decided to go run errands. I still find that interesting. I'm just being honest. And then, as a matter of fact, when the White House trolled everybody and put the picture of those two together and posted two kings, the only one they freaked out about was Trump. And it was a joke. He's not a king. He's not a dictator. I'm going to say this again. If he was what you guys claim he has been for the last 11 years, he would have never left office the first time. I'm going to say this again. It's really easy for somebody, especially when they are the de facto leader of all the stuff, to, basically go to some E5 with delusions of grandeur and say, look, I don't want to leave. And if you put together a crew to hold the White House, you're my new guy in charge if I don't have to leave. Trust me, it could have been done. And that's what the left thought was going to happen, but it didn't. It's what they're trying to convince you was going to happen again, but it probably won't. I say probably because you never know. I mean, dude is about to turn 80. There may be a switch or something that flips, and he may lose his shit. I don't know. You don't know. We can't take anything for granted anymore. But all I'm saying is the best indication of future behavior is past behavior, and he's already left once. So just saying. All right. So anyway, let's talk about this.
This, at first blush here, is a win for the plaintiffs who were not black plaintiffs. They were non-minority voters who challenged this decision. These two districts that were minority majority. Essentially, Louisiana had drawn up districts, and then they were told in a legal battle that they had not represented black and minority voters sufficiently. They went back and drew a second district. So they had two of these minority majority districts. Well, then non-black voters sued and said, this is now violating our rights on the basis of race. So it looks like this is a 6-3 decision. There is one concurrence here, but it looks like the dissent sticks together with Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson. But here's what the majority says. They say in some, because the Voting Rights Act did not require Louisiana to create an additional majority-minority district, no compelling interest justified the state's use of race in creating SB 8. That was those two new districts. That map is an unconstitutional gerrymander, and its use would violate the plaintiff's constitutional rights. Now, this opinion is almost 100 pages long, so we're going through to see if it says something more broadly about the Voting Rights Act. That had been the fear on the left, that somehow this decision, if it was favorable for those challenging these maps, that it would somehow do a big chunk out of the Voting Rights Act. Haven't gotten to language that suggests that yet. It sounds like this decision is primarily about what happened in Louisiana. So we'll keep digging through this, but for right now, it's a win for those who were challenging these two minority-majority districts. Now, as we read through this and figure out the broader implications, there were 20-plus districts across the country that would have potentially lined up with this decision. They could be open to challenges that they were drawn on the basis of race, or that it was the primary factor that was used in drawing those districts. Most of those are throughout the South. So we'll look to see if there's enough sweeping language in this particular decision that may have a domino effect on some 20 other districts. Could be huge for the midterms. We'll continue to read through.
All right, so again, I have started trying to read through this. I will say I can't really find anything that dumps Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but according to the dissenters, it's gone now. I guess we'll see. All right, and there's more. I think we actually even have a clip of some of the exchanges. I'm going back through my notes here. Let's see. So hang on. Like I said, I've got a handful of clips on this one, and I'm just going to kind of play them all. Just because, reasons. So hang on. All right. And this one, well, the next couple are from our friends over at the Communist, or the Always Corrections Made News Network, otherwise known as CNN, because they can't put a story out anymore without having to put a retraction out a few minutes later. But here they are talking about this very same thing. So here we go. Well, of course you're going to do that to me now. One moment, please. Let me get back over here so you guys aren't going, dude, you're making me seasick with all these changes. All right, so let's do that real quick. Wait for this to load. Loading. All right, and share this tab instead. Load it over here. Pardon me while I talk to myself for a moment. For those of you who think I'm crazy because I talk to myself, I'm going to tell you what I have come to take as gospel from one of my grandmothers. She always said it's okay to talk to yourself. It's even okay to answer yourself. It's when you start asking yourself in the middle of a conversation, what the fuck are you talking about, that you know you got a problem. So I rarely ask myself WTF. I won't say it won't happen. It doesn't happen, but it's rare. All right, so here's the clip I was trying to play a second ago that didn't want to load.
2018, right? Because that's sort of the baseline. That was, of course, the first Trump term. That was where Democrats were sort of keeping pace. You go back to April, look at the generic congressional ballot. What you see? You see +3 Democrats in 2025 in April. You see +3 Democrats back in April of 2017. Now jump over to this side of the screen. What happens? Well, the Democrats are no longer keeping pace with the pace that they were setting back in 2017, 2018. You look back in 2017, you saw that the Democrats had leaped up to an 8-point advantage. I remember covering this. I remember a lot of folks, including myself, saying, you know what, Republicans look pretty decent right now in terms of the fact that they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, but things were likely going to flip. And I was looking for the same signs this year. The bottom line is it hasn't happened, Kate Baldwin. It hasn't happened. Democrats have stayed basically steady. They have fallen off the pace. Democrats were way out ahead back in 2017 on the generic congressional ballot. And now we're basically looking at Democrats ahead. But again, they are so far in back of the pace that they set back there. And so I think what a lot of folks are seeing, folks like myself, are saying, wait a minute, given what we might be seeing in redistricting, is this +3 going to be enough, Kate Baldwin?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. One change from that cycle is also this mid-decade redistricting effort that we've been covering so much. Add that in, and what do you get?
Okay, so we add that, and we take a look at the national picture, but then we, of course, taking a look at the state legislators, right? They are potentially changing things, and there are two things that are going on here. First off, net mid-decade redistricting gains. If both sides max out at this point, there are more Republican gains possible than Democratic gains. Yes, the Democrats might try to counter a Texas and a California, but you go along in the different states, and basically Democrats run out of room where Republicans are able to gain and gain and gain. If both sides max out, we're probably looking at a GOP gain of +7 House seats. That doesn't even take into account the potential gutting of the VRA that is right now going to be in front of the Supreme Court. If you add that in, you could be looking... The
Voting Rights Act.
What? Yes, exactly right. The Voting Rights Act. If you add that in, then you could be looking about adding 10, 12, 15, 17 on top of this 7 seats. So I think a lot of folks like myself are looking at this. We're seeing, hey, wait a minute. Those national polls are... Democrats are not gaining the way that we expected.
What did I just... What is going on? Okay, there we go. It was weird. I couldn't hear myself in my ears for a second. I was trying to figure out what happened. I hit the wrong switch again. Anyway, I kind of wanted to leave this on the screen, but it looks weird whenever... I guess I could do that. It looks weird with the chat on the side. So I was like, I still kind of want to leave this on the screen for a reason, because I want you guys to see that number. So this is without everything else that's already happened. And this is one of the things that I've been trying to explain to my Democratic friends. Y'all started this mess a long time ago. You have basically gerrymandered the hell out of all the blue states and the blue districts that you could. You've used jungle primaries where you could to try to keep control. And now we're tired of watching you guys play by your own set of rules and us trying to continue to play by these Marquis of Queensberry rules. So we've decided to get into the redistricting game as well. And this is why this is important, because I will say that even though there's not really anything, at least so far, that I've been able to find in the 96, 97 page assent or agreement that says that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is gone, in the dissent, it's there because they feel like this is going to have a negative impact for Democrats in several other areas. And if that's true, and I don't know whether it is or not, he's right. That could push things if Republicans actually press the advantage, which we suck at doing, by the way. If anybody in leadership is watching this today, please don't take your foot off the gas. Please don't. You just don't. Just don't, because at this point, this shows you how desperate they're becoming. But the reason this becomes important is if we press the advantage, now that we are probably going to have it, you're talking about anywhere up to +12 in House seats. Now, if we continue to push the advantage of, hey, we need to really stop counting the illegals in the national census levels because they don't have voting rights in federal elections, which is the same. Remember, the scary thing is as much as they've tried to convince us that the Democratic Party is nicer, newer, cooler, and not the same old racist bastards that they've always been. Remember, it was the South that wanted slaves counted proportionally to increase their voting bloc in the House. Skin tones might be a little lighter, but everything's still the same as it was before. They are wanting people that have absolutely no right to vote in our federal elections to be counted in the census so that they can increase their block in the House. And that's, again, I've been saying this for forever. This is one of the reasons why up until recently, both sides kind of wanted the same thing, but for different reasons. The right wanted, illegals because it was cheap labor. They could keep their costs down. It made it easier for, people to not have to pay exorbitant prices for all the things because, manufacturing in this country started getting expensive because, living here for a while got really expensive. And so there's been this push from both sides. Well, we kind of need the illegals, but one side really didn't want to admit it. And the other side was just like, I mean, for the longest time, everything that we're saying now, the left was saying, and now they're just like, yeah, no, everybody's American. Doesn't matter how they got here. Doesn't matter if they're actually a citizen or not. Once you're here, you're American. It's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. But the reason this becomes important is this. The simple fact of the matter is, if we do all of the redistricting that we can do and we get the illegals removed from the census, the blue stranglehold dies. California won't have near the weight that it used to. And it shouldn't, because none of their policies are working. New York wouldn't have near the weight that it used to. And it shouldn't, because again, none of their policies are working. We're going to be getting into that as well, because reasons. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is about these numbers that I had up on the screen. Now, again, look at what happened in the elections, in the midterms, halfway through Trump's first term, and Democrats swung everything, but that's because they were at least 5 points above the margins. Right now, they're in the margin of error, which is the other reason why they have been panicking and trying to say this is racist and we have to do something about it and we got to do this and we got to do that and we better get it all done or else it's going to be terrible. And for them, they're probably not wrong. But for me and you, I'm just saying, is it really going to be that bad? If you value freedom, if you want a country where people stop being validated or invalidated by the color of their skin and actually based on what it is and who they are, if you want a country that celebrates differences without exploiting them, then we may finally be headed in the right direction. And as promised, here's yet another clip, and then let's see, how much time do I actually have on show clock? All right, so we still got technically 10 minutes till the break. So I'm not using the actual world clock today because we got started late. So, and again, you guys will actually get the full 2 hours. So stay, but so we don't quite have to take a break yet. So here's the next clip.
Democrats with a very clear shot of taking control of the U.S. House of Representatives, according to the Kalshi prediction market odds. We saw them in an 83% chance. But those odds have gone plummeting down. Now we're talking about just a 63% chance, while the GOP's chances up like a rocket, up like gold, up from 17% to now a 37% chance. So we'll look like a pretty clear, likely Democratic win in the House come next year has become much closer to a toss-up at this point, although still slightly leaning Democratic.
What's changed? What are you seeing?
Okay, what has changed? Well, why don't we just take a look at the national picture first? Take a look at voters and how they're feeling about things. And we can take a look at the generic congressional ballot. And I want to take a look and compare it to 2017, 2018, right? Because that's sort of the baseline. That was, of course, the first Trump term. That was where Democrats were sort of keeping pace. You go back to April, look at the generic congressional ballot. What you see? You see +3 Democrats in 2025 in April. You see +3 Democrats back in April of 2017. Now jump over to this side of the screen. What happens? Well, the Democrats are no longer keeping pace with the pace that they were setting back in 2017, 2018. You look back in 2017, you saw that the Democrats had leaped up to an 8-point advantage. I remember covering this. I remember a lot of folks, including myself, saying, you know what, Republicans look pretty decent right now in terms of the fact that they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, but things were likely going to flip. And I was looking for the same signs this year. The bottom line is it hasn't happened, Kate Baldwin. It hasn't happened. Democrats have stayed basically steady. They have fallen off the pace. Democrats were way out ahead back in 2017 on the generic congressional ballot. And now we're basically looking at Democrats ahead. But again, they are so far in back of the pace that they set back there. And so I think what a lot of folks are seeing, folks like myself, are saying, wait a minute, given what we might be seeing in redistricting, Is this +3 going to be enough, Kate Baldwin?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. One change from that cycle is also this mid-decade redistricting effort that we've been covering so much. You add that in, and what do you get?
Okay, so we add that, and we take a look at the national picture, but then we, of course, taking a look at the state legislators, right? They are potentially changing things, and there are two things that are going on here. First off, net mid-decade redistricting gains. If both sides max out at this point, there are more Republican gains possible than Democratic gains. Yes, the Democrats might try to counter a Texas and a California, but you go along in the different states, and basically Democrats run out of room where Republicans are able to gain and gain and gain. If both sides max out, we're probably looking at a GOP gain of +7 House seats. That doesn't even take into account the potential gutting of the VRA that is right now going to be in front of the Supreme Court. If you add that in, you could be looking.
The Voting Rights Act.
What? Yes, exactly right. The Voting Rights Act. If you add that in, then you could be looking about adding 10, 12, 15, 17 on top of this 7 seats. So I think a lot of folks like myself are looking at this. We're seeing, hey, wait a minute. Those national polls are Democrats are not gaining the way that we expected. Then you add in the fact that the state legislators are adding potentially more GOP seats like they've already done down in Texas, like they've done in Missouri. And then you add in the potential gutting of the VRA. And all of a sudden, it becomes much more difficult for Democrats to gain, especially given that they are not keeping up with their 2017, 2018 pace.
And as you said, that also makes it difficult to compare it to past examples in history because this is such a different.
Okay, so we're going to stop right there because all she does for the last few seconds of this is give it some spin so Democrats don't throw something at their television. But here's the thing, folks. I'm going to say this again. We're already at +7 with what's happened. Florida's still working on it. At this point, if I were Texas, I would go back and redraw and give them, 1. But I don't run Texas. But again, if we can, even with everything that's happening, if we can get the census redone, at least for future elections, because I don't think there's any way to get it done in time for this one. I wish there was. They should have been pulling the trigger on that a long time ago. But I wish there was a way to do that. Then the Democrats could potentially never win an election again, which is why they're panicking, because they've been cheating for forever. As BZ just put in the chat, his 1960s civics teacher, Mr. Helms, used to say Democrats don't win elections, Republicans lose them. And then we got to the point where Republicans were starting not to lose them. So then the Democrats had to find new and creative ways to cheat, while the Republicans kept saying, well, we can't really prove that they're cheating. So besides, if we lose, as long as we lose with honor, that's the only thing that matters. Anyway. All right. So as we continue to talk about all of this stuff, there is one other thing that I think we definitely need to be discussing. And that's kind of one of the weirdest little snippets from the argument in Supreme Court regarding Louisiana, because the ACLU was there and they said something really weird. But here, this is about a 34-second snippet, so it won't take long. I just want you guys to hear this part.
That's right. And in the state of Louisiana, that analysis was conducted in the Nairn case. And it was clear that regardless of party, white Democrats were not voting for black candidates, whether they were Democrats or not.
Patently false, but let's let it keep going.
And we know that there is such a significant chasm between how black and white voters vote in Louisiana that there's no question that even if there is some correlation between race and party, that race is the driving factor.
Can you comment on the Solicitor General's suggestion at page 20?
That's right. And in the state of Louisiana, that
all right, so this, again, this was the person that's on the screen right now is an ACLU attorney. And according to an ACLU attorney, when voters vote, the only thing that matters is, do they look like me? If that were true, Barack Obama wouldn't have won in 2008. Just pointing that out. And I'm going to say this again, that should have been the death knell for racism in this country. And instead, the left doubled down. Now, this is where things get interesting, and you're already starting to see it happen. Hang on. Oh, wait, there we go. For some reason, my brain is not clicking on this today. So the left is going to say the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and they already did in their dissenting opinion. The right is going to say the court finally put a constitutional limit on race-based district drawing. Now, I'm going to say this. I actually agree with the folks on the right. Yeah, I know I'm really not supposed to say that kind of stuff out loud, but it's true. Those are not the same claim, and the distinction does matter. For years now, Americans have been told race must be front and center in every institutional decision. College admissions, hiring, government policy, corporate training, political maps, all the things. And the argument is always the same. If you don't use race aggressively enough, you are racist and you're probably violating somebody's civil rights. But the Constitution does not say government may endlessly sort Americans by race as long as the state motive is progressive enough. In plain English, the court is saying you cannot fix racial discrimination by making race the permanent engine of election law. And that is important. And again, it's one of those things where I kind of feel like the Supreme Court is trying to drag us back into the 21st century because we were there and we knew we were there from the moment Barack Obama got elected, but then they tried to tell us that things were worse than they were in the 60s. But that's the core tension here. The Voting Rights Act was written to protect voters from discrimination. It was not written to permanently turn race into the operating system of American elections, or for all of America, for that matter. And this is where conservatives have to be clear, not sloppy. Do not say voting rights don't matter, because they do. Don't say racial discrimination has never existed in American elections, because it absolutely has. But also, don't let anyone tell you the only way to fight discrimination is to make government more discriminatory, or, in the words they use, race conscious forever. At some point, the equal protection principle has to mean something. At some point, the Constitution has to say, no, the government cannot keep dividing people this way. That is why this decision matters beyond Louisiana, because every state legislature, every redistricting lawyer, every activist group, every federal judge looking at congressional maps is going to be asking the same thing now. How much race-based map drawing is too much? And once again, the court is forcing the country to wrestle with a question politicians would rather turn into a bumper sticker. What does equal protection actually mean if the government is still sorting people by race? The left says this is civil rights protections. The court says there are constitutional limits to those protections. And voters are stuck in the middle trying to figure out whether their district was drawn because of geography, community, party advantage, racial math, or some combination of all of the above. That's why this stuff matters. It sounds procedural. It sounds like lawyers arguing over maps, but maps decide power. And when maps decide power, the people drawing them will always pretend their motives are pure. That's why we need courts to be skeptical, not partisan, skeptical. We've gotten away from that in this country lately, too. Because the Constitution is not supposed to ask which party benefits, or as my good friend BZ says all the time, cui bono. It is supposed to ask, what does the law allow? All right, so we're going to go ahead and take the break, and I have to admit I'm a little bit behind on my pacing, so we'll actually be doing the hour one end when we come back from the break, because we're about to be long if we don't. But my name is Rick Robinson. This is my show, and we'll be foregoing the extended break for the day to make up for some of the time that I've lost and get through the rest of my notes. So the break will not be that long, but we do, in fact, have to take one. It is, of course, Chat Lives Matter Day, so if you're not in the chat exercising the fact that this day should matter to you because you're a member of the chat, I don't know how else to help you. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRN Radio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at klrnradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRN Radio.
Celebrity designer Jeff Lewis is back with Hollywood House Lift.
I'm excited to be working with new clients.
I'm not getting rid of that.
I hope I never see you both again.
An all-new season.
Those have to go. That has to go.
From oh, wow,
It's been an actual nightmare.
to oh, wow.
This is such an upgrade.
With celebrities like Josh Duhamel, Christina Ricci, and Gina Rodriguez. Dazzle me, Jeff.
It looks like Chuck E. Cheese.
Stream an all-new season of Hollywood House Lift with Jeff Lewis, now streaming on Freevee.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Let's see, does the Trump dance work with this song? Nah, not really.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show, where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout. Heartland Radio, raw and real. Tune in, speak up, and feel what we feel.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Not the few. We'll grab your coffee,
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it is Chat Lives Matter Day. Let's crank this back up for a second.
with a backbone, voice of the free. Rick's got the pulse of liberty. It's the Rick Robinson Show, bold on a...
And welcome back into the program. Hour 1 is officially in the books. Hour 2 still underway, and we're still doing some housekeeping because I didn't get all the way through my Hour 1 material, and I don't want to leave anything on the table till Friday because there's too much to talk about. So, that being said, if you haven't done so yet, please make sure you are liking the feed, sharing the feed, subscribing or following, whatever your options are that are available to you. And we greatly appreciate any of you that are willing to do that because that is actually the easiest way to support us, and it's free because it helps us get past the dreaded algorithms. If you like what we do around here, though, you'll see a nice little QR code right there in the corner. That takes you directly to a donations link that you can use to help support what we do around here, and it goes towards monthly expenses because we do has them. We do has them. Anyway, so we're back. We're live. So we're going to finish up the court segment here because I feel like we need to. But this, and again, we're back from the break officially, but this isn't where I was planning on taking the break. because this brings us into the broader court problem. We have lower courts issuing sweeping orders. We have higher courts stepping in to pause those sweeping orders or narrow them or potentially even overturn them. And we have politicians on both sides treating the judiciary like it's a vending machine. Put in your lawsuit of choice, select the policy outcome that you want, and then shake the machine vigorously if you do not get what you want when it drops. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual problem. The modern injunction culture has turned individual district judges into national policy referees. One judge in one district can issue a broad order that affects federal policy across the country, which was never the design of our founding fathers. Then everyone scrambles to the appeals courts, and then maybe the Supreme Court gets involved. And by the time the legal dust settles, the political calendar has moved on. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not healthy governance, and it's also not a sign of a healthy government. And again, both parties complain about this when they are on the losing end, but the left has become especially dependent upon it. When Trump acts, sue. When the administration changes enforcement priorities, sue. When federal officers respond to riots, sue. When red states draw maps, sue. When blue states get blocked, suddenly the courts are anti-democratic. You can't have it both ways. If courts are legitimate when they block your opponent, they are legitimate when they block you. Which is why I never really take much time to call any of the courts legitimate, because they block our side a lot more than they block theirs. So anyway, that's why I've started. Most judges, I consider them activists with robes, especially depending upon where they have been seated at. So if judicial review matters when you like the outcome, it still matters when the outcome hurts. Now, while we're talking about courts, threats, political rhetoric, and where the legal lines are, we probably need to touch on the James Comey situation too. Former FBI Director James Comey is expected to self-surrender after being indicted over that 8647 seashell Instagram post, which was in bad taste and an outright lie, but it's not an actual death threat. 86 is used in common parlance. The right getting upset about this is just as silly, in my opinion, as everybody getting upset about Carolyn Levitt using the language of shots fired, because I know for Gen X and above, that sounds like a threat. For everybody below that age bracket, though, that's just a common parlance being used for when somebody throws shade, which a lot of us still seem to understand. So yeah, to me, this seems about that silly. Now, again, I'm not faulting them for trying it because it's something the left would have done. I'm just saying I don't think it's going to get anywhere. Anyway, so according to prosecutors, they say this amounted to a threat against President Trump. The charges reportedly include making a threat against POTUS and transmitting a threat in interstate commerce. According to Rusty Weiss from Red State, the case has been framed through me trying to talk, take two, has been framed through acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's argument as follows: that threatening the president is not a political joke, it is a federal crime. Congress put on the books. ABC News also reported Comey is expected to self-surrender in the Eastern District of Virginia. And here is where I want to be completely honest with you and as transparent as possible. I don't like James Comey. I think he's a sleazeball. I think there are probably plenty of other things that he's done wrong that I think we should be using this time to go look for and find, because I don't think this one's going to stick. I think Comey has done serious damage to trust in federal law enforcement. I think he knew exactly how cute he was being with that post. And I do not buy for 1 second that a former FBI director of all people had no idea that the phrase 86 could in fact carry a darker meaning in the political climate we're living in. But I also think this case may be legally harder than people want it to be, because the First Amendment does not disappear just because the speaker is someone I don't like. That's the discipline test right there. Threatening the president is serious. It should be taken seriously. After everything we've watched over the last few years, actual assassination attempts, if you count the ones where firearms were involved, we're looking at 3. If you count the guy who somehow didn't get the president's schedule and tried to break into Mar-a-Lago, we're up to at least 4. Escalating rhetoric, people treating political violence like it's some kind of online team sport. You can't just shrug off ambiguous messages anymore, especially when they're aimed at the president. But criminal prosecution still has to be clear and still has to get past a very high bar. The government has to prove this was more than ugly political hyperbole, or as one of my friends who has never seen the word before said, hyperbole, more than stupid internet edgelording, more than a tasteless message, and more than the kind of thing that makes normal people say, come on, man, you knew exactly what you were doing there, which is what I said when I saw the post. I'm like, you can pretend you found this. We all know you're the one who did it. And we all know that you put that out on the internet because you thought it would be edgy and cool. But is it enough to get him charged with incitement of violence? Probably not. Is it enough for a criminal conviction? That's where the First Amendment problem comes in. And this is the line I want to hold. We can say the post was reckless, gross, dangerous, and unfunny without pretending the prosecution is guaranteed a slam dunk. That actually makes our argument stronger, because if we only care about speech protections when our friends are talking, we don't believe in the First Amendment. We believe in protection for our side. And I, for one, refuse to play that game. And again, an old axiom, I may not like what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This is kind of where this is going to be falling into line. And let's not pretend that Comey hasn't already faced a lot of consequences for his stupidity. We're the ones that keep dragging him back in the spotlight. Nobody even cares who he is anymore. His career's over. He's not doing anything important. So his own inanity has already relegated him into obscurity, and now we're talking about him again because we have to, because he's back in the news. So yes, take threats against the president seriously, especially with everything that's been happening. Yes, apply the law evenly. Yes, stop pretending violent coded rhetoric is harmless when the target is Donald Trump, but also, yes, make the government prove the case, because the Constitution is not a team jersey, or at least it shouldn't be one. And that is exactly the point that we've been trying to make today. Now, before we leave this legal/government section, let's make one more stop in New York City, because courts are not the only place where reality eventually catches up with political fantasy. Budgets make it happen too. New York City Mayor Zoran the Commie Mamdani and City Council Speaker Julie Menin have pushed the city's executive budget deadline from May 1st to May 12th, while they try to close a multi-billion-dollar budget gap. Now remember, and I told you, Mamdani was going to run into this, because and this is a problem with a lot of, especially young incoming politicians, because they see the government act as if, whether it's state, local, federal, whatever the case may be, they see the government acting as if they have an unlimited well of money that they can dip into whenever they want. And because that's how our governments behave, a lot of people seem to think that's exactly the reality, and it's not. So reality is punching the commie right in the face, because they are trying to close a multi-billion-dollar gap. According to reports, that gap is somewhere around $5.4 billion. And Mamdani has said the city faces a crisis of major scale. Now, I'm going to say something that will probably shock almost every socialist in America. When you promise people free everything, eventually somebody has to pay for that, because ain't nothing free. And apparently New York City has reached the invoice portion of the program, because the bills come due and they ain't got the money. Mamdani and Menon were asking Albany for more help, including changes to the pass-through entity tax credit. That is the kind of phrase politicians use when they want to say tax somebody else, but make it sound like a spreadsheet had a baby with a law school textbook. And former Mayor Eric Adams had the cleanest summary of the whole damn thing. Free is a lie. That's it. That's the bumper sticker. Free is a lie. Because there's no such thing as free government. There's only government where the cost is hidden, delayed, shifted, borrowed, taxed, or handed to somebody who did not vote for the promise. This is the warmth of collectivism, folks. Everybody gets a blanket. Or do they? Because usually the blankets are old, dirty, tattered, and torn. And 6 months later, you find out the blanket was financed at 28% interest, and the state wants your thermostat controls too. And listen, Mamdani says the city inherited a deficit. Fine. Every mayor inherits problems. Every executive walks into somebody else's mess, but leadership is not just pointing at the mess and saying, Albany, can you, there's Got to clean up on aisle 11. Governor Hoochie Cooch, can you bring us a mop? Leadership is deciding what you can afford, what you cannot afford, and which promises were campaign poetry instead of governing reality. That is the common thread today. Courts say no, budgets say no, statutes say no, the Constitution often says no, and even reality says no. And a serious country has to remember how to hear the word no without declaring it oppression. Socialism always sounds compassionate in the brochure. It sounds like abundance. It sounds like fairness. It sounds like everybody gets what they deserve. But when the bill comes due, it sounds a lot more like a press conference begging somebody else to pay. And this takes on an entirely different shape when, again, taking into account one of the oldest, not old, but one of the more recent, I guess, explanations of communism and socialism that I've ever really heard that made sense is, say, a large group of people go to lunch, and then the bill gets divided up based on how much each one of them makes. So the guy who's making millions of dollars pays about 60% of the bill. The other 40% gets divided up among everybody else that's at the table. However, the 40% are ordering the lobster, they're ordering filet mignon, they're ordering all these different things. And the rich guy, because rich guys often are, unless they're just insanely rich and in the public spotlight a lot, they're very frugal, is what makes them rich in the first place. So they're ordering, something reasonable, but then they're footing most of the bill. Eventually, the rich guy gets pissed off and just stops coming to lunch. New York City's facing that in real time today, because in New York City, reality just sent a past due notice. Now we move from fiscal reality to street level reality because budgets are one place where fantasy hits the wall, law enforcement is another. And in the Ninth Circuit, everybody remember, and I remember this from high school, early college days, Rush Limbaugh was always yelling about the Ninth Circuit and how liberal they had become. And at one point, he even started calling them the Ninth Jerkit. I don't know if at some point I woke up in an alternate timeline or if there's just been enough of a political shift that that's not really the case anymore. But I will say this one surprised me. The Ninth Circuit just stepped into the Portland ICE protest case, or as we're going to start calling them, the NICE protest case, with a reminder that should not be controversial, but somehow is protest is protected, but siege isn't. The First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect vandalism, trespass, and obstruction of law enforcement. And yes, somehow we have to say that out loud in 2026. All right, so we still got lots more to talk about. So coming up next, we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about here. We're going to talk protest rights because we're going to get into this a little bit more. Crowd control and the difference between peaceful dissent and laying siege to a federal building. And this is when we were supposed to be going to break. So I'm trying to trim out some of the language because we didn't actually go to break yet. Remember, this was all supposed to be bottom of hour one. So, again, we were talking about this a moment ago. The Ninth Circuit has stepped into the Portland ICE protest case, and this ruling matters because it draws a line that should not be controversial, but somehow for half the country seems to be. The First Amendment, again, protects your right to peaceful protest, or actually technically doesn't even say peaceful protest. It says peaceful assembly. It does not protect vandalism, criminal trespass, or obstruction of law enforcement. It's not some extremist position. That's basic constitutional order. The case involves protest outside of the ICE facility in Portland. Lower courts had restricted federal officers' use of crowd control tools. The Ninth Circuit stayed those restrictions. Reporting from the OPB says the ruling eliminates restrictions imposed by two federal judges in Oregon that had strictly limited when federal officers could use tear gas on crowds outside the facility. I'm going to say this again. Sometimes I don't think tear gas is enough, especially when they're dumb enough to be protesting in sub-zero temperatures. Water cannons, just saying. But that's the ball game, folks, because if a crowd is blocking entrances, damaging property, interfering with cameras, stopping vehicles, remember that stopping vehicles part, or refusing lawful dispersal orders, we are not just talking about peaceful protests anymore. And that's the point. This is one of the points that I've been making for a long time. Once law enforcement comes on the scene and says, hey, This is no longer a peaceful protest. You must disperse immediately. Especially if they have video footage and everything else supporting their claim that this is no longer a peaceful protest. That should be the moment where everyone is required to leave, or you start sending in paddy wagons, water cannons, pepper balls, whatever you got to break it up. I don't care. We have become retarded in this country when it comes to this kind of stuff. People can't break windows and then scream that it's a peaceful protest and they're using their First Amendment right to shatter other people's windows. They can't deface somebody else's property and say, but it's my First Amendment expression. You want a First Amendment express? Do it on your own property. You want your house to look like some sort of ghetto with graffiti everywhere? It's your house. The city's still eventually going to yell at you and say, hey, you got to clean this up. And then you got to deal with them. But if it's your property, you can pretty much do what you want until the city says you can't. So this is when we start talking about things like obstruction. And here's the line that we need to be able to say without apology. Protest is protected. Siege is not. You have a right to stand on a sidewalk and criticize the government. You have a right to hold a sign. You have a right to chant. You have a right to be angry. You have a right to tell the administration, ICE, the president, Congress, the courts, whatever you think or whoever when they're wrong. You do not have a constitutional right to prevent federal officers from entering or exiting a federal facility. You do not have a constitutional right to vandalize cameras. Unless it's your own, then we don't care. You do not have a constitutional right to throw objects and then call the response retaliation. The First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect the brick you throw after the speech. Now, the plaintiffs in this case argue they were peaceful protesters and that they were targeted in retaliation for exercising First Amendment rights. That is a serious claim, ladies and gentlemen, and it should be heard very seriously. If the government agents target peaceful people because of viewpoint, that is in fact wrong. But the Ninth Circuit majority said the plaintiffs had not shown enough at this stage to keep the lower court restriction in place, and the court was clearly bothered by how broad the lower court injunction was. Remember those black robe activists I was talking about earlier? That is the key. The lower court did not just say don't retaliate against peaceful protesters. It put restrictions on crowd control tactics in a way the appeals court said could prevent federal officers from responding when people were obstructing law enforcement and threatening law enforcement as well as other people's safety. That is not about civil liberties anymore. That is handcuffing law enforcement in the middle of a confrontation. That brings us to the judicial burn of the week. The district court had apparently gone so far as to order changes to ICE agents' uniforms so they would have more conspicuous identifying markings. The Ninth Circuit said federal courts are not the couture of law enforcement. I don't know what word I was trying to use there, but they're not the arbiter of law enforcement officers. They may be one of the greatest judicial lines of the week, and that may be one of the greatest judicial lines of the week. Federal courts are not the arbiters of law enforcement officers, especially when it comes to what they wear. I guess they were saying couture, maybe. I think I was trying to make a clothing joke. I don't think it landed well for me when I was going back through my notes. So anyway, so translation, judges don't get to become the wardrobe department for ICE. So yeah, I guess it was a couture joke. Anyway, and honestly, that line kind of matters, even though I stumbled all over it, because it speaks to a larger issue. Some judges have gotten way too comfortable micromanaging the executive branch and the executive branch's operations. They're not just deciding whether conduct is constitutional or not. They're trying to redesign policy, tactics, uniforms, enforcement priorities, and administrative processes. That's not judging. That's governing from the bench. And this is exactly why we keep talking about black robed activists. There is a constitutional right to peacefully assemble, or peaceably. There is not a constitutional right to lay siege to a federal building and then demand that the government respond with lavender-scented bath bombs and soft-voiced customer service. Once you block entrances, damage cameras, throw objects, or stop law enforcement vehicles from moving, you're not just protesting policy anymore. You're interfering with the operation of the government. And if the government cannot respond to that, then law enforcement becomes theater. Now, I'm going to break this down a little further because what is the actual definition? You know, the one that they threw around all the time on J6, you know, that special little word they kept using all the time, insurrection. What is the actual legal definition of insurrection? Because we've been watching insurrections happen all over the country for months now, for years now, and it wasn't J6. So let's pull this back into the political double standard. When courts block Trump, the left calls it a constitutional referendum and pure accountability. When courts block Democrats or side with Trump DOJ, suddenly the judges are dangerous, according to those same people. When federal officers are restrained, it's protecting civil liberties. When that restraint gets lifted because the order is too broad, it becomes authoritarianism. The standard seems to be courts are sacred when they restrain Trump, dangerous when they restrain Democrats, and fascist when they let law enforcement enforce the law. That's not a principle. That is outcome worship. And I use that word very seriously because if you've noticed, over especially the last 2 decades, there are certain things the Democrats treat as if they are religion. Climate change. That is a religion of the left. The right, basically being the new Nazi party, has become a religion of the left. And they worship those outcomes when they land in their favor, and then they lament them when they do not. This is why so many Americans are exhausted all the time. They can see the double standard with their own eyes, and then the media tells you to ignore the very thing that you see with your own eyes because it's not really there. If a group of right-wing protesters surrounded a federal building, blocked vehicles, interfered with cameras, ignored dispersal orders, and threw objects, do we think the national media would call that and them a mostly peaceful constitutional protest among conscientious activists? No, they would call it an insurrection starter kit because they have already. But when the cause is fashionable, suddenly we have to parse every word. Suddenly obstruction is direct action. Suddenly vandalism is resistance. Suddenly crowd control becomes state violence. Nope. Words still matter. Categories matter. Peaceful protest is not the same thing as a riot. Dissent is not the same thing as obstruction. Civil disobedience is not a magic spell that makes consequences disappear. If you choose to break the law as an act of protest, then part of the tradition is accepting the legal consequences of those actions. It is not demanding the court prohibit law enforcement from responding. You don't get to riot under the First Amendment and then hide behind the Constitution when somebody tells you you got to move. And that's where the Ninth Circuit ruling fits with the redistricting fights, the Comey indictment, and the Mondami budget disaster. In Virginia, the question is whether political actors followed the rules. In Louisiana, the question is whether government can keep drawing districts with race as the controlling factor. In the Comey case, the question is where actual threat law ends and protected political speech begins. In New York City, the question is whether political promises can survive contact with math, because math is the first science. It's also one of the first proofs of the language concept, and math is not malleable. It either works or it doesn't. In Portland, the question is whether protest rights erase the government's ability to secure a federal facility. Different facts, same theme. Limits. Authority has limits. Rights have boundaries. Process matters. And ultimately, math matters. And nobody likes that when they are the ones being limited. The activist does not like being told the First Amendment does not protect vandalism. The party drawing the map doesn't like being told that the process matters and you did it wrong. The former FBI director does not like being told that violent coded political messaging might have consequences, which it does and it should, but I think this one is way too thin. But while you've got him, start looking for other stuff. The socialist mayor does not like being told that free has a price tag because it's not actually free. The lower court does not like being told its injunction went too far, but that is what the law is supposed to do. It is supposed to say no when necessary. And a country that cannot hear no anymore is not a free country, because we've become a bunch of spoiled brats if we don't understand the meaning of no anymore. Freedom requires boundaries. If there are no boundaries, the strongest crowd will always win. The loudest mob wins. The most aggressive faction wins. And eventually ordinary people stop participating because they know the rules only apply to them. And I dare say, ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty close to where we are today. That is how trust dies, and that is why these court rulings matter more than the legal jargon makes it sound as if they do. This is not just about lawyers. It's about whether Americans still believe there are rules above politics. Because if there are not, then the Constitution is just another weapon. And once the Constitution becomes a weapon instead of a restraint, everybody loses. All right, so we are going to go ahead and take the final break of the show. After the break, we're going to be widening the lens a bit because the law does not just define political power. It can, and I still think it's the wrong approach, but it can, and especially lately, has been teaching a society what human life is worth. There's a story out of Switzerland about a physically healthy, grieving mother who ended her life at an assisted suicide clinic. And when you connect that to what's been going on with Canada's MAID program, the question gets very dark very fast. What happens when a society stops saying you are hurting, let us help you, and starts saying you are hurting, but let us help you die instead? That's next, right here on The Rick Robinson Show. Again, my name is Rick Robinson. We've got one final segment when we come back, and then I'll be back later tonight for the rest of Chat Lives Matter, because Wednesday's one of my busy days. But stay tuned. Yes, I had a vapor lock for a moment there. It happens.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Celebrity designer Jeff Lewis is back with Hollywood House Lift.
I'm excited to be working with new clients.
I'm not getting rid of that.
I hope I never see you both again.
Yeah. An all-new season.
Those have to go. That has to go.
From oh, wow,
It's been an actual nightmare.
to oh, wow.
This is such an upgrade.
With celebrities like Josh Duhamel, Christina Ricci, and Gina Rodriguez. Dazzle me, Jeff.
It looks like Chuck E. Cheese.
Stream an all-new season of Hollywood House Lift with Jeff Lewis, now streaming on Freevee.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
And welcome back into the final segment of the Rick Robinson Show. We'll be going until I run out of notes, but I have shortened a couple of the breaks, so we did kind of make up for lost time either way. However, we do still have some more stuff to get to, so let's get back to it. So welcome back into the program. So at this point, we're going to be shifting overseas for a bit, as I told you a moment ago, because this connects to the same question we've been asking for weeks now, and actually especially for the last few days. What does the law teach a society to value? And the even broader question is, when did we allow the law to decide what sets value? In America, we're talking about maps, courts, protest rights, federal authority, and law enforcement. But underneath all of that is a deeper question about dignity, boundaries, and what the law is supposed to and is actually designed to protect. And this story out of Switzerland is absolutely heartbreaking. Wendy Duffy was a 56-year-old British woman. She was physically healthy. Her son Marcus died at 23, and she never recovered from that loss. Reports say she ended her life at the Pegasus Clinic in Basel, Switzerland, after years of grief. Now, we're going to slow down here for a second because I'm not mocking her for that grief. For some of you may know that I lost my brother back in November. I have not been the same since. My dad has not been the same since. So I'm not mocking how she's feeling here. I'm not pretending grief is simple because it's not. Hell, I've been, up until recently grieving my divorce that happened all the way back in 2020. I'm finally getting to the point where I feel like I'm not stuck in that mire anymore, but it took forever. And as a father and as a grandfather, I cannot imagine losing a child. It was hard enough losing a brother. And I, for one, pray that none of us ever have to know that kind of pain. This woman needed help. She needed people around her. She needed a system that looked at her and said, your pain is real, but your life still matters. Instead, the system helped her die. And that's where this gets really dark really fast, because once a society accepts the idea that some suffering makes life no longer worth protecting, the line does not stay where they promised it would stay, and it never does. And you're starting to see this seep into society. I don't think I've seen any actual court cases of it yet, and if I have, I don't remember. But there have been a couple of TV shows where kids were trying to sue their parents because they were born because of how terrible their life was. Is that where we're headed? But again, none of the lines never stay where they say it's going to, and it never will. The sales pitch is always narrow at the beginning. It is always framed as compassion in the most extreme cases. It is always presented as rare, careful, limited, and humane. Anybody remember that with Roe v. Wade? And then the category expands. Terminal illness becomes chronic illness. Physical suffering becomes psychological suffering. End of life becomes about your quality of life or lack thereof. Then quality of life becomes, well, you're too damned expensive. So it becomes all about your cost of care. And before long, the language of compassion starts sounding an awful lot like convenience or like a ledger. Look at Canada. Health Canada's 2024 report says their MAID program accounted for 5.1% of all deaths in Canada in 2024. That is more than 1 out of every 20 deaths in that country. The same federal report there says that represented 16,499 assisted deaths in 2024. And Canada has already moved far beyond the original public sales pitch that many people heard, that this would only be about terminal illness at the very end of life. Now, to be precise, Canada's expansion of this program for people whose only underlying medical condition is mental illness has been delayed until 2027. So we should not oversell that as already fully active. But notice what that means. It was not rejected as morally wrong. It was delayed because the system wasn't ready for it. That should bother every single one of us because, again, we have come to a point in Western society where humans are nothing more than sacks of meat. And because of that, if you disagree with the president, you should be able to murder him. It's just a sack of meat. Somebody will replace him. If you don't like what your children are doing, you can get rid of them because they're just sacks of meat. You can make others. The scary, you think I'm kidding. I used to do a show called Panorama that we have Men Explained Poorly that kind of became the replacement of that show when it got shelved. And there was more than one time that I was, and trust me, these are people that I came to consider friends, but I was coming to blows with people from Canada who were saying things like, why would you risk your own life to save a child from drowning when you could just make another? That's not made up. That's not me that's not me looking for shock value. That is an actual conversation point that came up more than once. Why would you put your own life on the line for one of your children when you could just make another? And people starting to think that way should bother everyone because, again, if life has no value, then nothing does. Because when a government-run health system starts looking at people through budgets, through ledgers, through links of wait lists, bed space, staffing shortages, and their quality of life formulas, how long before compassion starts sounding like cost control? That's not care. that is disposal with paperwork. And this is why the pro-life argument cannot stop at abortion. It has to include the elderly. It has to include the disabled. It has to include the depressed. It has to include the grieving mother who thinks her life ended when her child died. Because once you teach a culture that life is valuable only when it is useful, easy, healthy, wanted, productive, or painless, you have not built compassion. You have built a sorting machine. Wendy Duffy did not need a death clinic. She needed a rescue mission. The answer to despair should be presence, not permission. A civilized country does not look at a grieving mother and say, yeah, it's all right. Just check out. Just check out. We can make this clean and easy for you. It says, stay with us. You still matter. We will sit with you in this. We will help carry what you cannot carry alone. That is the difference between compassion and abandonment. And I know some people will say, well, Rick, who are you to judge her choice? I'm not judging her pain. I don't have any pain that compares to it, but the closest comparison point I have is my brother. And I'm not going to check out over it because my race isn't done. If my race was done, I would already be home. Ladies and gentlemen, there are things that have happened in my life that should have sent me home. They didn't, which tells me I'm not done yet. And that should have been her point too. What if instead of living in that grief, she found a way to take it and start talking to other people that needed to hear the things that she was going through and started helping other people. But because it was so expedient and easy just for her to be done, that's what she decided to do. She could have helped change the world. She still may, but not in the way that probably God intended. She still may eventually become one of the cases that is enumerated to define and decide why these type of programs need to end. But she could have taken all of that pain, all of that grief, and used it to help other people. And again, I'm not faulting her for what she decided to do. I can't. I'm not her judge. She's with her judge now, who will decide what happens next. And I'm not judging her, but I am going to take a moment to judge a system that turned her pain into a procedure. I am judging a culture that increasingly treats human beings as problems to be managed instead of souls to be loved. And I am warning that once life becomes a cost-benefit ratio and a cost-benefit analysis sheet is then created, the vulnerable always lose. Always. The poor lose. The disabled lose. The elderly lose. The mentally ill lose, the grieving lose, the lonely lose, and people with power get to call it compassion because that sounds better than admitting we built systems that would rather process people than love them. This is where law and culture meet. If the law says life is disposable under the right conditions, culture will eventually start deciding which conditions qualify. And that, in my opinion, even though we have started down it, is not necessarily a road that we want to walk upon. So as we get ready to close things out for the day, let's put all this together. We opened with a king giving President Trump a bell from the HMS Trump, and we had some fun with that because honestly, kind of needed that. But after the joke, the serious question of the day has been the same all show long. What does the law teach a society to value? In Virginia, the law is asking whether political power still has to follow process. The Supreme Court's Louisiana ruling is the law is asking whether the government can keep sorting voters by race in the name of protecting voting rights. In the Comey indictment, the law is asking whether a message crosses the line from ugly political speech into a prosecutable threat, and that line matters even when the speaker is somebody I don't like. And I'm going to say this, especially if the speaker is somebody that I don't like. In New York City, the budget is asking whether socialist promises can survive contact with reality and arithmetic. In Portland, the Ninth Circuit is asking whether protest rights erase the government's ability to protect a federal facility. In Switzerland and Canada, the law is asking whether suffering people should be surrounded with care or offered death as an option dressed up in compassion. Different stories, same moral center, or in my opinion, lack thereof. The law is not neutral in the way people pretend it is. Law teaches, law forms habits. Laws tell people what society will tolerate, what it will protect, and what it will punish. If the law says vandalism is protest, people will act accordingly. And they have been. And that's not even with the law saying so. Popular culture has been, with the media, nothing to see here, mostly peaceful, has been telling everybody you can do whatever you want. And because of who you are and because of your skin color, in most cases, nobody's going to do anything to you. That is why we used to talk about these kind of stories all the time. They don't really seem to be happening very much anymore, which is interesting. But everybody remember the shoplifting flash mobs? Funny how we don't seem to have much of those anymore, which would tend to lend some credence to the fact that maybe our economy is not as bad as we think. Because under Obama, when it was kind of trash, and under Biden, when it was kind of trash, people were literally just getting together in groups and looting entire stores and running off with whatever they could carry. I don't know if it's just not being covered anymore or if it's not happening anymore. If the law says vandalism is protest, people will act accordingly. If the law says process only matters when your side is losing, politicians will act accordingly, and they have been. If the law says race must remain the operating system of politics forever, institutions will act accordingly, and they have been, in the guise of trying to let that argument go away. Because all they do is change the names, change the labels, and keep the same policies in place. If the law says threats are no big deal when the target is Donald Trump, the culture and the assassins will act accordingly. If the law says despair can be answered with death, vulnerable people will hear that message loud and clear, and they will act accordingly. This is why we cannot reduce these fights to party politics. Yes, party politics is all over this. Of course it is, because I'm not naive and neither are you. But underneath the party fight is something much deeper. Do we still believe limits matter? Do we still believe process matters? Do we still believe rights come with boundaries? Do we still believe every human life has dignity, even when that life is painful, inconvenient, expensive, fragile, or brokenhearted? That is the real fight. The Constitution was never intended to be a partisan team jersey. It does not say free speech for my side and crowd control for your side. It does not say gerrymandering is evil when Republicans do it and democracy saving when Democrats do it. It does not say, and just reminder, who was gerrymandering named after? Again, pretty sure that guy was a Democrat. It does not say courts are legitimate only when they hand me the policy outcomes I wanted. And if not, I'm going to sit here and shake the vending machine until I get what I want. And human dignity is not a budget line. Never should been, never should have been, never has been, should never be. And yet we're starting to do that anyway. It does not disappear when somebody gets old. It does not disappear when somebody gets sick. It does not disappear when someone is grieving so deeply they can't see past tomorrow. A decent society does not tell suffering people that they are burdens. A decent society tells them that they are loved. A free society does not let the loudest mob rewrite the rules. But we've been doing that for a while now. So I ask you the question, using that as your focal point, are we actually still a free society anymore? A free society insists that the rules apply even when the mob is loud. Does it? Do they, though? Because so far they really haven't been. Now, I'm not saying we're not trying to drag everything back to that core point. But again, if those are your measuring sticks, we're failing. And a constitutional republic does not survive by pretending every political desire can be laundered through a lawsuit and called justice. So here's where I land today. Rights, while sacred, do in fact have boundaries. Authority has limits. Process matters. Math matters. Human life has always had, should always have, and in my opinion, does have dignity. Even the ones that you're uncomfortable about. And the Constitution does not change meaning depending upon which political team benefits. That shouldn't be a radical thought. Should be our baseline. But in 2026, apparently the baseline needs defending. Does it really need defending or defining? So we've been spending all day both trying to defend it and define it. And to define it. Ooh, that was my Okie slipped out again. So when the fight's over maps, we're going to define everything with all of this stuff because I think we need to. So we're going to get out of here, ladies and gentlemen, here in just a moment. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out with us today. I think we've gone through everything in as much detail as I can. for the time that we had available. I want to remind everybody that I'll be back tonight starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, first pushing buttons for the Inquiry crew. Stephen will be there. I'm not sure if the elf is going to be back or if there'll be another guest inquisitor. I guess I'll find out that here in just a little bit. We'll be back tonight for the Conservative Curmudgeon. That is at 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, pushing buttons and adding commentary when G requests me to do so. And that is then 9 p.m. Eastern, Behind the Enemy Lines Radio with Gene and Ross. And I may or may not be a guest over there, depending on whether I receive an invite. Because, of course, when they ask, I'm already sitting at my desk. I might as well join in. And then 10 p.m. Eastern, Rick and Orty, 11 p.m. Eastern, Edge of Liberty. So I will be with you till probably about midnight Eastern time tonight. And then it all starts over again tomorrow. Oh, wait, sorry. My bad. All right, we're going to get out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, in between shortening breaks and making sure that we didn't leave anything on the table, I did get you your full 2 hours today, even though the numbers don't look quite that way on the counter itself, because we didn't do our usual music breaks because they were too long. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Well, actually, guess we won't. I'll be back tonight. Shit. Don't know what time it is. Don't know what day it is. I just know I've been working since Saturday and I was supposed to be off Saturday. So, bye, everybody. Fucking assassins. Go to another country. I don't have to do the news in other countries. Go do that over there. Bye, everybody.
Capital steps. Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout.
I knew there was something else I wanted to talk about, and I left it on the screen so I didn't forget, and then was too busy going through my notes and never came back to the screen. One of the most interesting arguments that I've seen about all this was pointed out by our good friend BZ in the chat. And it's basically the same thing the left has been saying now forever. If you're exhausted, all of that exhaustion would go away if you just do what we tell you to do. It's kind of been their framing point. And sadly, for a long time, people have been agreeing with them. I still think, despite all the irregularities that have come to light with 2020, I still think everybody just being tired of the crap was the other thing that pushed it the other way. But I'm going to say this again. I think we dodged a bullet. I know, bad phrasing for what just happened, but still, by Trump actually getting a bifurcated term, I think we dodged a big mess because he wouldn't have done much of anything if his second term was consecutive, if the rest of the results had gone the way that they did. Anyway, now I am officially getting out of here. Bye, everybody.
That's real, the Rick Robinson Show where we say what we feel.
Say goodnight, Gracie.